Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to absolutely dismantle a massive historical misconception. When we think about the medieval period, we usually picture ancient science just kind of moldering away in the shadows, right? Locked in these dusty archives while Western European monks and nuns laboriously copied Latin texts by candlelight. But what if I told you that while Europe was, well, hitting the snooze button, the rest of the world was wide awake and innovating like crazy?
So, that brings up a really huge question. Were the Dark Ages actually dark, or were we all just looking in the wrong place? It's a question that completely changes how we view human progress. Like, was the loss of ancient science a global phenomenon, or was it just a localized European one? Because if we shift our gaze just a bit to the east, we find an era of incredible scientific, social, and economic buoyancy that literally laid the groundwork for the modern world.
Right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the Great Translation Myth, and why this is arguably history's greatest misconception.
Okay, let's dive into this. The traditional narrative, the myth that gets passed around, is that Arab scholars simply acted as this giant, passive, dusty library, just preserving ancient Greek texts until Europe was finally ready for them again. But the reality? Completely different. The scholars of the Islamic world didn't just translate to preserve. They manipulated, they criticized, and sometimes they outright rejected those foreign works. And by doing so, they catalyzed a brand new, highly original scientific revolution.
Moving right along to Section 2, Birth of a Golden Age, we're going to look at these socioeconomic drivers that actually made this massive revolution possible.
The sheer speed of this cultural explosion is honestly breathtaking. Think about it. In the 750s CE, the Abbasid Caliphate rises to power. By 762, they found the magnificent city of Baghdad. Just a few decades later, in the 790s, the first paper mill is built right there. And by the early 9th century, all this incredible scientific scholarship coalesces around a legendary library known as the House of Wisdom.
Now, the arrival of paper in the 8th century, it absolutely cannot be overstated. Paper had been invented in China centuries earlier, sure, but the craft of paper making reached the Abbasid world right at this perfect, pivotal moment. Because paper was vastly cheaper to produce than papyrus or parchment, it caused a massive, sudden drop in production costs. Writing in huge quantities finally became practical, and that fueled an unprecedented knowledge boom.
And man, they were hungry for knowledge from everywhere. Over at the House of Wisdom, translators were paid a handsome monthly salary just to bring the world's wisdom into one centralized hub. They were actively translating crucial scientific, mathematical, and philosophical texts from Persian, Sanskrit, Greek, and Syriac. They were essentially blending the most advanced Indian mathematics with classical Greek philosophy. It was the ultimate intellectual melting pot.
And this brilliantly illustrates the true spirit of the era. The House of Wisdom wasn't just a quiet library. It was basically an ancient Silicon Valley. It was this lavishly funded tech incubator supported directly by the caliph's massive wealth. It brought together well-traveled intellectuals from all backgrounds: Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Zoroastrians. All those theological disputes, they were just set aside in favor of a shared, really passionate pursuit of scientific inquiry.
Okay, let's transition to Section 3, Pioneers of Modern Science. It's time to meet the absolute rock stars of this golden era and check out their achievements.
We absolutely have to start with Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. Look, if you use a computer, if you scroll through social media, or even if you just do basic math, you are relying on his work every single day. The very words algebra and algorithm are derived directly from his name and his groundbreaking 9th century texts. He fundamentally shaped the mathematics that run our modern lives.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer scale of Avicenna's or Abu Ali Sina's impact on global health. It's staggering. He wasn't just sitting around writing theoretical texts. He literally invented the concept of quarantine to limit the spread of contagious diseases, and he laid down the foundational methodologies for clinical trials and efficacy testing. His absolute masterpiece, the Canon of Medicine, remained a cornerstone of medical education for centuries.
Then we have Jabir bin Hayyan, who is totally rightfully known as the father of chemistry. He basically pioneered the use of the scientific method in chemistry, establishing core laboratory processes. We're talking filtration, distillation, crystallization, sublimation, and oxidation. And let's be clear, these aren't just ancient parlor tricks. These are the exact foundational laboratory processes that run our modern chemical, pharmaceutical, and industrial sciences today.
Over in the realm of physics, we find Ibn al-Haytham, the father of optics. Not only did he invent the pinhole camera, which fundamentally changed our understanding of light and vision forever, but he also championed a highly structured experimental method. He insisted on systematically testing and answering scientific queries through rigorous experimentation, way before the scientific method was ever formalized in Europe.
And the engineering was just as revolutionary. In the 12th century, Al-Jazari developed a mechanical system that is, no joke, likely sitting in your driveway right now. He figured out how to take input rotary motion, run it through a crank-connecting rod system, and output linear motion to lift heavy objects. This exact conversion is the literal groundwork for modern internal combustion engines.
If you need proof that these folks weren't just copyists, just listen to their contemporaries. The 13th century Syriac patriarch Bar-Hebrius noted that while Arab scholars started with translated wisdom, they constructed such incredible scientific edifices through their own elegant research that the rest of the world suddenly found it absolutely necessary to seek wisdom from them.
Which brings us to a much more somber chapter. Section 4, the fall of the Enlightenment and the tragic collapse of this incredible era.
Let's move on and see how this builds into a really tragic downfall. You see, this decline wasn't caused by just one single thing. It started with the political fracturing of the once unified Abbasid Caliphate. That was followed by a rise in religious conservatism, with figures like Al-Ghazali criticizing the strict application of reason. Then, shifting global trade routes slowly drained the region's economic lifeblood. And finally, the devastating Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258 CE physically destroyed the institutions, the libraries, and countless irreplaceable texts.
But it wasn't all lost. As we'll see in Section 5, a legacy that lives on, this ancient knowledge actually became the DNA of our modern science.
The everyday modern conveniences, the medical care, and the technology that you and I rely on today, they trace their roots directly back to this specific era of Islamic innovation. From the very structure of our hospitals and the math that powers our software, to the engines in our cars and the scientific method we use to uncover the truth, they all carry the undeniable DNA of the Islamic Golden Age.
So, the crucial point is this. The Golden Age of Islam was not just some passive waiting room for Western history. It was their active, critical analysis, their total willingness to adapt, manipulate, and even reject older foreign works that truly built the blueprints for our modern world. They didn't just save history, you guys. They changed its trajectory forever.
Which leaves us with a totally fascinating thought to end our explainer today. When you consider how deeply interconnected human progress truly is, and just how much knowledge was forged in the fires of Baghdad and beyond, without the Islamic Golden Age, would the European Renaissance have ever even happened? It's a pretty powerful reminder of how shared our global history really is. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep questioning the history you think you know.